I stood in my empty apartment on my 32nd birthday, staring at a single cupcake I bought myself while my phone buzzed with photos from my sister Madison's elaborate birthday party last month, complete with a live band catered dinner and 50 guests. My father spent $12,000 on that celebration. Today, not even a text message. But this year feels different. This year, I've been secretly saving every penny for 18 months, and I'm about to make a purchase that will change everything forever. My name is Rhett, and the pattern started when I was 7 years old. While other kids got birthday cakes and parties, I got forgotten. Not maliciously, my father would claim later, just busy with work. But Madison, 2 years younger, always had elaborate themed celebrations that the whole extended family attended. I remember my 10th birthday particularly clearly. I waited all morning then, all afternoon watching the clock tick past dinner time. Finally, around 8 in the evening, my father rushed in with a hastily wrapped gas station gift card and a grocery store cupcake, apologizing about some urgent client meeting that had run late. The next week, Madison turned 8, and our house transformed into a princess wonderland, with hired entertainers, professional decorations, and a custom 3-tier cake that cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. The contrast became my normal. Madison's birthdays were events that required weeks of planning guest lists and family coordination. Mine were afterthoughts, if they were thoughts at all. By the time I reached high school, I stopped expecting anything beyond the obligatory last-minute acknowledgement. Now at 32, I work as a senior accountant at Henderson Financial Group in downtown Portland. My apartment is modest, but comfortable, a one-bedroom place with decent light and a view of the city skyline if I crane my neck from the kitchen window. I've built a quiet life for myself, methodical and predictable, much like the numbers I work with every day. Last month marked Madison's 28th birthday, and true to form, my father outdid himself. He rented the entire rooftop restaurant at the Meridian Hotel, hired a 4-piece jazz quartet, and flew in a chef from San Francisco to prepare a custom tasting menu. The guest list exceeded 100 people, including distant relatives I rarely see, except at these lavish celebrations for my sister. I attended, of course, wearing my best suit and bringing an appropriately expensive gift. But walking through that crowd of people who barely acknowledge my presence, watching my father give speech after speech about Madison's accomplishments, while presenting her with a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than my monthly salary, I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's celebration. The photos from that night still fill my social media feeds. Madison, radiant in her designer dress, my father beaming with pride as he toasts his beloved daughter, family members gathered around tables decorated with imported flowers and crystal centerpieces. Professional photographers captured every moment, ensuring the memories would be preserved in perfect clarity. Today, my birthday passed in complete silence from my family. My father posted on social media about closing some important business deal, complete with pictures from a client dinner at an upscale steakhouse. His phone was clearly working fine. He simply chose not to use it to acknowledge my existence. But as I sat there with my solitary cupcake, my phone rang. Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, called to chat about weekend plans. During our conversation, I mentioned feeling a bit down about my birthday being forgotten again, and her response stopped me cold. "Oh, honey," she said, sounding genuinely confused. "Your father told us years ago that you prefer quiet birthdays and get really upset when people make a big fuss. He said you specifically asked the family not to call or send cards because it makes you uncomfortable." My blood went cold. He said what? That you're very private about birthdays and celebrations stress you out. That's why we've all been respecting your wishes and giving you space on your birthday. I've been wanting to call every year, but didn't want to upset you. I sat in stunned silence as the full scope of my father's deception became clear. For years, he had been actively preventing my extended family from acknowledging my birthday by spreading lies about my preferences. While he encouraged elaborate celebrations for Madison that brought the whole family together, He had systematically isolated me by claiming I didn't want their attention. After hanging up with Aunt Sarah, I opened my banking app and checked the balance in my savings account. $47,000. For the past 18 months, I had been living on bare essentials, putting every extra penny into this secret fund. Originally, I thought I was saving for a house down payment somewhere in the distant future. Now I realized I was saving for something much more important: my independence from this toxic dynamic. The plan that had been forming in the back of my mind suddenly crystallized into sharp focus. Tomorrow, I would drive 2 hours north to Clearwater Lake and make an offer on a piece of property that held more meaning than my father could possibly understand. Clearwater Lake sits nestled in the Cascade foothills, surrounded by Douglas fir and pine trees that create a natural cathedral around the pristine water. As I drove the winding mountain road the next morning, memories flooded back from my childhood visits to my grandfather William's cabin. Grandpa William was everything my father wasn't. Patient, attentive, genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Every summer from ages 5 to 15, I spent 2 weeks at his lake house, learning to fish, build tree forts, and appreciate the peace that comes from being surrounded by nature instead of chaos. The cabin itself was rustic, but charming. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a stone fireplace that dominated the living room, and a wraparound porch that offered stunning views of the lake. Grandpa William built most of it himself, back in the 1970s, using timber from his own property and craftsmanship that came from genuine love of the work. During our last visit together when I was 19, and he was battling the cancer that would eventually take him, Grandpa William made me a promise, while we sat on his dock watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. "This place will stay in the family forever, Rhett," he said, his weathered hand resting on my shoulder. "Your father understands that. When I'm gone, this will be here for you and Madison, and any kids you might have someday. Some things are more important than money." Grandpa William died 4 years ago, leaving his entire estate to my father, with clear verbal instructions about maintaining the family cabin. I assumed the property was being preserved, as he wished, held in trust for future generations. I met real estate agent Patricia Monroe at the property entrance, a professional woman in her 50s who specialized in lakefront properties. She greeted me warmly and led me up the gravel driveway to the cabin, which looked exactly as I remembered it, except for some needed maintenance. "The seller is motivated to close quickly," Patricia explained as we walked through the rooms. "He's been trying to move this property for almost 2 years now. Originally listed it for $65,000, but he's come down to $45 because he needs a fast sale." The interior needed cosmetic work, but the bones were solid. Grandpa William's craftsmanship had stood the test of time. The stone fireplace still dominated the living room. The hardwood floors needed refinishing, but were structurally sound, and the kitchen required updating, but was completely functional. "Can you tell me about the cellar?" I asked, though my heart was already pounding with a terrible suspicion. Patricia consulted her paperwork. "A gentleman named Richard Blackwood. Lives down in Portland, says he inherited the property from his father, but doesn't have use for a vacation home. Seemed pretty desperate to close when we last spoke." Richard Blackwood, my father. The full betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father been lying to the extended family about my birthday preferences, but he had been secretly attempting to sell Grandpa William's cabin, the one place that represented unconditional love and acceptance in my childhood. The property he had promised his dying father would remain in the family forever. "The seller seemed to mention some financial pressures," Patricia continued, apparently not noticing my stunned expression. "He mentioned something about gambling debts during our initial consultation, though he asked me to keep that confidential. I probably shouldn't have said anything. Gambling debts. While he was spending thousands of dollars on Madison's birthday parties and shopping sprees, my father was apparently gambling away money he didn't have, to the point where he needed to sell his own father's property to cover his losses. "I'd like to make an offer," I said quietly. "Wonderful. What were you thinking?" "Cash offer, $43,000, 5-day closing. Patricia's eyes widened. Cash. Are you certain that's quite a bit under asking price? I'm certain, and I can provide proof of funds immediately. Within an hour, we had drawn up the paperwork. I signed the purchase agreement and provided my bank statement as proof of funds. Patricia seemed delighted with such a straightforward transaction, especially after dealing with a seller who had apparently been difficult and demanding throughout the listing process. As I drove back down the mountain that afternoon, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling through my chest. Anger at my father's betrayal, sadness about Grandpa William's broken promise, but also something else I hadn't felt in years, a sense of taking control of my own destiny. In 5 days, I would own the one place on earth where I had ever felt truly valued and loved. My father would get his quick sale and his gambling debt relief, never knowing he had sold the property to the son he had spent decades ignoring and deceiving. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening with my family's finances. There were still too many pieces of this puzzle that didn't fit together, and I suspected the gambling debts were only the beginning of the story. The next morning, I called Martin Cross, the family attorney, who had handled Grandpa William's will and estate planning. Martin had been our family lawyer for over 20 years, a meticulous man in his 60s, who prided himself on attention to detail and ethical practice. "Rhett, good to hear from you," Martin said warmly when his secretary connected us. "What can I help you with today?" "I wanted to ask about Grandpa William's will and my inheritance," I said carefully. "I'm getting older and thinking about financial planning, and I realized I never got clear details about what he left me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your inheritance, Rhett. I'm not sure what you mean. Your grandfather left his entire estate to your father with some specific verbal requests about family property. But didn't he leave anything directly to me and Madison? I thought there might be trust funds or something similar." Another pause longer this time. "Actually, there was a trust fund established for you. $25,000 plus the expectation that you would eventually inherit the lake house. But your father requested delayed distribution, claiming you weren't quite ready for that level of financial responsibility at the time." My hands tightened on the phone. "When was this?" "Right after your grandfather's death 4 years ago. Your father said he wanted to invest the money wisely and distribute it when you were more mature. He's been managing the trust account since then." "How much should be in that account now?" "With conservative investments over 4 years, I'd estimate somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 depending on the growth strategy your father chose." I had never received a penny from any trust fund. In fact, when I needed money for my accounting certification 3 years ago, I had to take out a personal loan because I couldn't afford the tuition and study materials. My father certainly never mentioned having access to funds that could have helped. "Martin, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Have you been concerned about how my father has been handling that trust?" A very long silence this time. "Rhett, I have to be careful about client confidentiality, but I will say that there have been some irregular withdrawal patterns that concerned me. Your father provided documentation about educational expenses and emergency funds, but the amounts seemed substantial." "What kind of amounts?" "I really shouldn't say without examining the records more carefully. But if you're concerned about the trust management, you have every right to request a full audit. You're the beneficiary, after all." I asked Martin to begin an immediate audit of the trust account and to send me copies of all withdrawal records and supporting documentation. He agreed to have preliminary results within 48 hours. After hanging up, I sat in my office at Henderson Financial, staring at spreadsheets on my computer screen, while my mind raced through the implications. My father had not only been lying to the family about my birthday preferences and secretly selling Grandpa William's cabin, but he had also been managing a trust fund in my name, while never telling me it existed. During lunch break, I walked across the street to meet my colleague Jessica Torres at a small cafe we frequented. Jessica worked in our forensic accounting department specializing in financial fraud investigations for corporate clients. She was one of the few people at work I trusted with personal matters. "I need your professional opinion about something," I said after we ordered sandwiches. Hypothetically, if someone was managing a trust fund and making unauthorized withdrawals while providing false documentation about expenses, what would that look like legally? Jessica raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically, that would be embezzlement and fraud. Probably felony charges depending on the amounts involved. Why do you ask? I explained the situation with my trust fund, my father's management of it, and the fact that I had never received any money from it, despite supposedly being the beneficiary. "Rhett, that's textbook financial abuse," Jessica said firmly. "If he's been using your trust money for his own purposes, especially while lying to you about its existence, that's serious criminal behavior. Do you have access to any of the financial records?" "The lawyer is auditing the account now. I should have results in a day or two." "When you get those records, bring them to me. I can help you trace where the money went and document the evidence if you decide to pursue legal action." That afternoon, I returned to work, but found it impossible to concentrate on client accounts and tax preparations. Instead, I found myself scrolling through Madison's social media posts from the past few years, looking at them with new eyes. Designer handbags, expensive vacations, spa weekends, the elaborate birthday parties I had witnessed firsthand. Madison had a part-time job at an art gallery that paid maybe $30,000 a year, yet she was living a lifestyle that would require twice that income. Her most recent Instagram story showed her leaving a high-end salon with freshly colored hair makeup professionally done and a shopping bag from Nordstrom. The caption read, "Daddy's treating me to early Christmas shopping spree. Best father ever." The comments below were filled with friends praising my father's generosity, and Madison gushing about how lucky she was to have such a supportive parent. Several family members had liked the posts and added their own comments about what a wonderful father he was. I screenshot everything, creating a digital folder of evidence that showed the pattern of lavish spending on Madison, while I had been systematically excluded and deceived. The timestamps on the posts corresponded with my birthday celebrations that never happened, creating a stark visual contrast between his treatment of his two children. As I closed my computer that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Monroe, the real estate agent. The seller had accepted my offer, and we were scheduled to close on the lake house in 3 days. Soon, I would own the one piece of my grandfather's legacy that my father hadn't managed to destroy or steal. But I was beginning to understand that the cabin was just the beginning of what I was going to fight for. Closing day arrived with crisp October air and brilliant fall colors painting the mountains around Clearwater Lake. I met Patricia at the title company office in the small mountain town of Pine Ridge, bringing a cashier's check for $43,000 and the satisfaction of knowing I was about to own the place that held my happiest childhood memories. The paperwork took less than an hour. Patricia walked me through each document, explaining the property details and transfer procedures, while I signed my name as the new owner of Lot 17 at Clearwater Lake. When she handed me the keys, I felt a surge of emotion that caught me completely off guard. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood," the title officer said, shaking my hand. "You're now the proud owner of a beautiful piece of lakefront property." I drove straight to the cabin, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the living room where Grandpa William had taught me to play chess and told me stories about his own childhood during the Great Depression. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the craftsmanship he had put into every board and nail. Standing on the wraparound porch, looking out over the lake that reflected the surrounding pine trees, like a perfect mirror, I pulled out my phone and took a single photograph. The image captured the view from where Grandpa William and I used to sit every evening watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, while he shared his philosophy about life, family, and the importance of staying true to your values. I posted the photo to Facebook with a simple caption, "Birthday gift, self-gift." I added hashtags about lakefront property, family legacy, and personal independence, then put my phone away and spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the cabin and planning the renovations I wanted to make. The response to my post was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing constantly with comments, likes, and messages from family members and friends who had no idea I had been saving money or looking at property. Aunt Sarah was the first to comment, "Rhett, this is amazing. I had no idea you were looking at lake property. Congratulations." Uncle David added, "Beautiful place. When's the housewarming party?" Cousin Brian wrote, "Dude, you bought lakefront property. That's incredible. How did you manage to save that much?" The comments kept coming from relatives I rarely spoke with, college friends, and coworkers, all expressing surprise and congratulations. Many mentioned they hadn't realized I was financially stable enough for such a major purchase, which made me realize how successfully my father had portrayed me as irresponsible and unsuccessful to the extended family. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's name, and his voice was absolutely furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed before I could even say hello. "Where did you get money to buy lakefront property? That's supposed to be my sale." "Hello to you too, Dad," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I saw a beautiful piece of property and made an offer. The seller accepted. Don't play games with me, Rhett. I know exactly which property you bought, because it was supposed to close with a different buyer next week. You went behind my back and stole my sale." The irony was almost too much to bear. "Your sale? I thought you said family property should stay in the family forever. That's what Grandpa William wanted, isn't it?" "You don't understand the situation," my father said, his voice becoming even more agitated. "I need that money. I have obligations, investments that need covering. You have no right to interfere with my financial planning." "Where did I get the money, Dad?" "That's what you asked, right? I saved it. Every penny. While you were spending $12,000 on Madison's birthday party last month, I was putting aside money from my job. You know, the job I've had for 8 years that you've never once asked me about." There was a brief pause. Then, my father's voice became low and threatening. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, let me tell you something about smart. Smart is understanding family loyalty and not destroying your father's business deals out of spite." Business deals? I thought this was about family property and honoring Grandpa William's wishes. Your grandfather's wishes don't pay for bad investments and cover debts that need immediate attention. My father snapped, apparently not realizing he had just admitted the real reason for the sale. The call ended abruptly when he hung up on me, but not before leaving me with a clear understanding that his motivations had nothing to do with family planning and everything to do with covering gambling losses and poor financial decisions. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Martin Cross with the results of the trust fund audit. "Rhett, I have the preliminary audit results, and I'm afraid the news isn't good," Martin said gravely. "The trust account currently contains $24,000. Based on the original $25,000 principal and 4 years of conservative investment growth, it should contain approximately $55,000. So $31,000 is missing." "That's correct. And the withdrawal pattern is concerning. Large amounts taken in increments over the past 18 months, always with documentation claiming educational expenses or emergency medical bills for you." "What kind of educational expenses?" "Graduate school tuition certification programs, continuing education seminars. According to the paperwork your father submitted, you've been enrolled in advanced accounting programs at 3 different universities simultaneously, while also taking emergency medical treatment for conditions I won't specify over the phone. I had never been enrolled in graduate school anywhere. My health insurance through Henderson Financial covered all my medical needs, and I hadn't had any serious health issues in years." "Martin, this is fraud. Clear, documented fraud." "I'm afraid you're right. And Rhett, there's something else. Your father left 3 angry voicemails on my office line this afternoon, demanding that I stop the audit and threatening legal action against you for interfering with family business matters. He seemed to know that you had requested the audit. After ending the call with Martin, I sat on Grandpa William's porch as the sun set over the lake, trying to process the full scope of my father's deception. He had stolen $31,000 from my trust fund to cover gambling debts and fund Madison's extravagant lifestyle, all while portraying me to the family as someone who couldn't handle responsibility or financial independence. My phone buzzed with a text message from Madison. "Saw your Facebook post. Nice place, had no idea you were house shopping. We should talk soon." For the first time in years, my sister was reaching out to me directly instead of communicating only through family gatherings. Maybe it was time to find out how much she knew about where her party money had been coming from. 2 days later, my father called an emergency family meeting at his house in the Portland suburbs. The tone of his voice when he invited me made it clear this wasn't really an invitation, so much as a demand, and his barely controlled anger suggested he had spent the intervening time building a case against me for what he was calling my betrayal of family trust. I arrived at the house where I had grown up, a large colonial-style home in an upscale neighborhood that my father had purchased during his most successful business years. The living room was arranged with chairs in a semicircle, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a tribunal than a family discussion. Present were my father Madison, Aunt Sarah, Uncle David, and my cousin Brian. Madison looked uncomfortable and confused, while the older relatives seemed curious but wary. My father sat in his leather recliner, like a judge preparing to render verdict. "I've called everyone here," my father began, "because we need to address Rhett's recent actions and their impact on this family's financial stability and unity." He launched into a carefully prepared narrative about how I had gone behind his back to purchase property he needed to sell for important business reasons. According to his version of events, I had been secretly monitoring his business activities and deliberately sabotaged a legitimate sale out of spite and jealousy toward Madison. This property sale was crucial to covering some temporary cash flow issues in my business, he explained to the assembled family. Rhett knew this, and he deliberately interfered to hurt me financially. This isn't just sibling rivalry. It's a deliberate attack on this family's economic well-being. Aunt Sarah looked confused. "But Rhett, how did you even know your father was selling that property? And where did you get money for a lake house?" Before I could answer, my father jumped in. "That's exactly what I want to know. Rhett's been living in a modest apartment claiming he can barely afford his bills. Yet suddenly, he has $43,000 in cash. Something doesn't add up." I had prepared for this moment, knowing that my father would try to control the narrative and paint me as the villain. I pulled out a folder containing the trust fund audit results, bank statements, showing my savings pattern, and printed copies of the fraudulent withdrawal documentation Martin had provided. "I'm happy to explain where I got the money," I said calmly. "I saved it from my job at Henderson Financial over the past 18 months. Every bonus, every tax refund, every dollar I could spare went into a savings account. I can show you the bank statements documenting every deposit." I handed copies of my bank records to each family member, showing the steady pattern of deposits that had built my savings to $47,000. "But that's not the real issue here," I continued. "The real issue is that Dad has been stealing money from a trust fund Grandpa William left for me and using that money to fund gambling debts and Madison's lifestyle." The room went completely silent. Madison's face showed genuine shock as I distributed copies of the trust fund audit results and Martin Cross's documentation of the fraudulent withdrawals. According to our family attorney, I was supposed to inherit $25,000 from Grandpa William plus the lake house. That money was placed in a trust fund that Dad has been managing for 4 years. $31,000 has been withdrawn from that account, using false documentation, claiming educational and medical expenses for me. Uncle David studied the paperwork with the careful attention of someone who had worked in banking his entire career. "Richard, these withdrawal dates correspond exactly with Madison's birthday parties and shopping trips. The amounts match what you've been spending on her celebrations." Aunt Sarah was staring at my father with the expression of growing horror. "You mean you've been using Rhett's inheritance money to pay for Madison's parties?" Madison suddenly stood up, her face pale. "Is this true? Have you been spending his money on my birthdays?" My father attempted damage control, claiming he had been protecting the trust fund from market volatility and investing it more wisely than the original conservative approach. He insisted the withdrawals were temporary loans that he intended to pay back with interest. Besides, he said, his voice taking on a defensive tone, the money was being used for family purposes. Madison's celebrations brought the whole family together. Rhett never seemed interested in that kind of gathering anyway. "That's because you told everyone I didn't like parties and didn't want to be contacted on my birthday," I said quietly. "Aunt Sarah, tell everyone what you told me on the phone." Aunt Sarah looked uncomfortable, but confirmed that my father had specifically instructed the extended family to avoid acknowledging my birthday because I supposedly found celebrations stressful and upsetting. "You've been isolating him," Uncle David said, his voice filled with disgust. "You stole his inheritance money, lied to the family about his preferences, and tried to sell his grandfather's property to cover gambling debts." Madison removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist, the one my father had given her at the elaborate birthday party last month. "I can't keep this knowing where it came from," she said, offering it to me. "If you've been spending his money without telling me, then I've been participating in theft without knowing it." My father stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. I'm being attacked for trying to manage family finances responsibly. Rhett, you're destroying this family's unity over money and property. Your grandfather would be ashamed." "My grandfather would be ashamed that you broke your promise to him," I replied. "You swore the lake house would stay in the family forever. Instead, you were secretly trying to sell it to cover debts while telling no one." Cousin Brian, who had been quietly examining the financial documents, finally spoke up. "Uncle Richard, I work in commercial banking, and these withdrawal patterns are clearly fraudulent. The documentation doesn't match any legitimate educational or medical expenses. This isn't family financial management, it's embezzlement." The confrontation continued for another hour, with family members taking sides and demanding explanations. Ultimately, the room divided clearly. Aunt Sarah, Uncle David, and Cousin Brian sided with me and demanded that my father make immediate restitution for the stolen trust money. Madison, to my surprise, also supported me and expressed genuine remorse about unknowingly benefiting from the theft. My father stormed out of the meeting, threatening to take legal action against me for family defamation and interference with business contracts. But his threats rang hollow in a room full of people who had just seen documented evidence of his fraud and deception. After he left, Madison stayed behind, crying and apologizing for not understanding what had been happening. For the first time in years, she seemed to see me as a real person, rather than just a background figure in her privileged life. "I never knew where the party money came from," she said. "I just assumed Dad was successful and generous. I never thought about how you felt being excluded from everything." "It wasn't your fault," I told her honestly. "You didn't know." But even as I forgave Madison, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning of the justice I was determined to pursue. The week following our family confrontation brought developments I never could have anticipated. On Wednesday morning, I received a phone call at work from a man named Harold Sterling, who introduced himself as my father's business partner in their construction company Sterling and Blackwood Building Solutions. "I hope you don't mind me calling," Harold said, "but I got your number from your Aunt Sarah. We need to talk about your father's recent financial activities, and I believe you might be able to help with a situation that affects both of us." We met that evening at a coffee shop downtown, where Harold explained that he and my father had been business partners for 12 years, building custom homes and small commercial projects throughout the Portland area. Harold was a straightforward man in his late 50s, clearly upset and struggling with a discovery that had shaken his faith in their partnership. 6 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in our business accounts, Harold explained. Money disappearing from project budgets, invoices for materials that were never delivered, payments to subcontractors we had never hired. At first, I thought it was accounting errors, or maybe fraud from an outside source. What did you find? Your father has been systematically embezzling from our company for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The missing funds total $68,000 so far. When I confronted him last week, he admitted to taking the money, but claimed it was temporary borrowing to cover some personal investment losses. The pattern was becoming clear. My father's gambling debts and financial irresponsibility had escalated beyond what he could cover through stealing from my trust fund. When the trust money ran low, he had moved on to embezzling from his business partnership. Harold, I think the personal investment losses were actually gambling debts. And I think he's been using your business money to replace money he stole from my trust fund when the family attorney demanded an audit. I explained the trust fund situation, showing Harold copies of the withdrawal documentation and timeline. When we compared dates, the pattern became unmistakable. My father had been stealing from his business partnership to cover the trust fund thefts when he realized an audit was coming. This creates a clear pattern of financial fraud across multiple victims, Harold said grimly. I've already consulted with my attorney, and we're prepared to press criminal charges, but having additional victims strengthens the case significantly. The next day, I met with District Attorney Monica Fletcher, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes. After reviewing all the documentation from both Harold and myself, she agreed to pursue criminal charges against my father for embezzlement fraud and financial abuse. The pattern of behavior suggests someone with serious gambling addiction and poor impulse control, DA Fletcher explained. The escalating amounts, the multiple victim sources, and the elaborate documentation fraud all point to someone whose financial situation was spiraling out of control. While the criminal case was being prepared, something unexpected happened that began healing the relationship I never thought could be repaired. Madison called and asked if she could visit the lake house to see what I had purchased and to have a serious conversation about our family dynamics. She arrived on Saturday afternoon carrying 2 photo albums and a grocery bag filled with supplies for dinner. Her demeanor was completely different from any interaction we had ever had, subdued and thoughtful, instead of the bubbly superficiality I was accustomed to. I brought these, she said, placing the photo albums on Grandpa William's dining table. I went through all of Mom's old pictures, and I found something I never noticed before. The albums contained photos from our childhood birthdays, and looking through them with adult eyes revealed a pattern I had been too young to understand at the time. In picture after picture, my birthdays were barely documented, a few hastily taken shots of me with a grocery store cake, always looking disappointed and alone. Meanwhile, Madison's birthday photos filled entire albums, elaborate decorations, large groups of celebrating relatives, professional quality shots of every moment. Look at this one, Madison said, pointing to a photo from my 11th birthday. You're sitting by yourself with a single candle and a cupcake, while the rest of us are cleaning up decorations from my party the week before. I never realized how isolated you were. But more revealing were the photos that weren't there. Madison found several envelopes of pictures, with dates corresponding to my birthday celebrations, but the photos themselves had been removed. In some cases, she could see torn edges where pictures had been ripped out. Dad removed photos of your birthdays from the family albums, she said quietly. He literally erased you from our family history. We spent the afternoon going through boxes of memorabilia Madison had retrieved from our childhood home, discovering birthday cards from relatives that had been intercepted, and hidden invitations to family gatherings that I had never received, and gifts that had apparently been donated to charity instead of given to me. I want to help fix this, Madison said as we prepared dinner together in Grandpa William's kitchen. I quit my part-time job at the gallery and got a full-time position with an environmental nonprofit. I'm going to pay my own way from now on and never accept money from Dad again. Over the next several weeks, Madison proved her commitment by helping me renovate the cabin. She learned to sand floors, paint walls, and repair the dock that had deteriorated over the years since Grandpa William's death. Working together on physical projects gave us a chance to rebuild our relationship based on shared effort, rather than the competitive dynamic our father had fostered. The criminal case against my father moved forward quickly, due to the clear documentation and multiple victims. His attorney approached DA Fletcher about a plea bargain, offering full restitution plus damages in exchange for avoiding jail time. "Your father is willing to pay $75,000 total," the DA explained during a meeting in her office. "That covers the full amount stolen from your trust fund, plus interest, and damages, plus restitution to his business partner. He would also be required to attend mandatory financial counseling and addiction treatment." I agreed to the plea bargain not out of forgiveness, but because I wanted the stolen money returned and official acknowledgement of what he had done. The payment would allow me to renovate the lake house properly and establish a real emergency fund for my future. 3 months after my forgotten birthday, Aunt Sarah organized what she called a birthday do-over at the lake house. 37 family members attended, including relatives I hadn't seen in years, who apologized for believing my father's lies about my celebration preferences. Uncle David gave a speech about Grandpa William's values and how proud he would have been to see me fighting for the truth and preserving the family property. The celebration was simple, but genuine: grilled burgers, homemade potato salad, and a chocolate cake that Aunt Sarah had baked herself. "This is what a real family celebration looks like," Madison said as we stood on the dock watching our younger cousins skip stones across the lake. "No hired caterers or professional photographers, just people who care about each other spending time together." 6 months later, I stood on the same dock where Grandpa William and I used to fish every summer evening, watching the sunset behind the mountains, while the lake reflected the sky like polished glass. The cabin renovation was complete, funded by the restitution money and my remaining savings, and the property had become exactly what my grandfather had envisioned: a gathering place, where family could reconnect with each other, and with the natural beauty that puts life's problems in perspective. The monthly family gatherings I hosted had become a tradition that brought together relatives who had drifted apart over the years. Unlike the elaborate celebrations my father used to orchestrate for Madison, these were simple affairs focused on conversation, shared meals, and activities that brought out the best in everyone. Children learned to fish and build tree forts. Adults played cards and shared stories. And teenagers discovered that life existed beyond their phones when they were surrounded by wilderness and genuine attention from caring relatives. Madison had transformed her life, completely embracing financial independence and finding fulfillment in her work with the environmental nonprofit. She had also started dating a marine biologist named Trevor, whose passion for protecting freshwater ecosystems aligned perfectly with her developing interest in conservation. Their relationship was based on shared values and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the superficial connections she had pursued when her self-worth depended on designer clothes and expensive entertainment. "I never realized how empty my old life was," she confided one evening as we prepared dinner for a gathering of 12 family members. "All those parties and shopping trips were just distractions from the fact that I didn't have any real purpose or meaningful relationships." My father had completed the court-ordered restitution and was attending both financial counseling and gambling addiction treatment as part of his plea agreement. Our relationship remained distant, but had evolved into something resembling mutual respect rather than the dysfunction that had characterized my childhood. He attended the family gatherings occasionally, usually arriving late and leaving early, but he was making an effort to rebuild trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. "I know I can't undo 32 years of mistakes," he said during one of our brief conversations. "But I want you to know that your grandfather would be proud of what you've done with this place. He always said the lake house should bring the family together, and that's exactly what you've accomplished." The healing process wasn't immediate or complete, but it was genuine. For the first time in my adult life, I felt connected to an extended family that actually knew who I was and valued my presence. Cousins who had been strangers began calling with job opportunities and invitations to their own celebrations. Aunts and uncles included me in holiday planning and asked my opinion about family decisions. The isolation I had accepted as normal for decades was replaced by belonging I hadn't known was possible. Jessica Torres, my colleague from the forensic accounting department, who had helped me understand the legal implications of the trust fund fraud, had become much more than a professional ally. Our friendship had deepened into romance, as we spent evenings at the lake house talking about our shared values and dreams for the future. She understood both my past pain and my current peace, supporting my journey without trying to fix or change me. "You've created something really special here," she said as we sat on the porch after the latest family gathering, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. "This feels like what family is supposed to be like." On my 33rd birthday, the contrast with previous years could not have been more dramatic. Instead of a forgotten day, marked by loneliness and resentment, I woke up in the cabin that had become my sanctuary, surrounded by cards and messages from family members who had driven hours to help me celebrate. The gathering was intimate, but heartfelt. 18 people who genuinely cared about my happiness and wanted to mark another year of my life with gratitude and joy. Aunt Sarah had baked a 3-layer chocolate cake using Grandpa William's favorite recipe, and Uncle David led a toast that brought tears to several people's eyes. Madison gave me a photo album she had carefully assembled, documenting the lake house renovations and family gatherings, creating the positive memories that would replace the painful photo albums from our childhood. But the most meaningful gift came from an unexpected source. Cousin Brian, who worked in banking and had been instrumental in exposing my father's financial fraud, handed me a wooden box that had belonged to our grandfather. "I found this in my parents' attic," he explained. "Grandpa William gave it to my dad for safekeeping years ago, with instructions to give it to you when you were old enough to appreciate it." Inside the box was my grandfather's fishing tackle, carefully maintained and organized exactly as he had kept it during our summer visits. There was also a handwritten letter, dated just months before his death, addressed to me specifically. Rhett. The letter began in my grandfather's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you've grown into the man I always knew you would become. The lake house, and everything that goes with it, was always meant for you, not because of birth order or favoritism, but because you understand what this place represents. Family isn't about blood relations or obligation. It's about people who consistently show love through their actions, not just their words." The letter continued with specific advice about maintaining the property, suggestions for family traditions, and his hopes that I would use the lake house to create the kind of memories that heal wounds and build lasting connections. He had somehow known, even in his final months, that I would need both the physical space and the emotional guidance to overcome the dysfunction that had shaped my childhood. As the evening wound down and family members began the drive back to their own homes, I found myself alone on the dock with Jessica, reflecting on a journey that had started with a forgotten birthday and led to the kind of life satisfaction I had never imagined possible. "What did you learn from all of this?" Jessica asked, her hand warm in mine as we watched moonlight dance on the water. I thought about the question seriously, considering everything that had happened since that lonely evening 6 months ago, when I sat in my empty apartment with a single cupcake and a growing determination to change my circumstances. I learned that self-worth can't depend on other people's recognition or validation, I said finally. For years, I measured my value by whether my father remembered my birthday or treated me fairly compared to Madison. But real happiness comes from self-respect, genuine relationships, and living according to your own values, rather than waiting for approval from people who may never be capable of giving it. I also learned that taking action to defend yourself isn't selfish or vindictive, I continued. When I bought this lake house and exposed the financial fraud, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to honor my grandfather's wishes and protect my own future. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to participate in dysfunction even when that creates temporary conflict. The most important lesson, though, was about the difference between family relationships based on obligation and those based on genuine affection. The relatives who rallied around me after learning the truth, like Aunt Sarah and Uncle David, demonstrated what healthy family dynamics look like. Even Madison's transformation showed that people can change when they're given accurate information and space to make better choices. As we prepared to go inside for the night, I took one last look around the property that had become the foundation of my new life. The cabin glowed with warm light. From the windows, the dock stretched into water that reflected the star-filled sky, and the surrounding forest created a natural cathedral that reminded me daily of what truly mattered. My father had forgotten my birthday every year while throwing lavish parties for my sister. But this time, instead of accepting that treatment or responding with bitterness, I had used my savings to reclaim my inheritance and build the kind of life my grandfather had always wanted me to have. The lake house wasn't just a real estate purchase. It was a declaration of independence, a commitment to my own worth, and a foundation for the kind of relationships that would sustain me for the rest of my life. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to demand the love you deserve, and the wisdom to create that love when others prove incapable of providing it. Have you ever had to take a stand for yourself against family members who weren't treating you fairly? How did you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being when others expected you to just accept poor treatment? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength, building healthy boundaries, and creating the life you deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.